In 1987, a young Italian beauty, just 19 years old, flirted her way backstage at an Eric Clapton concert in Paris. That woman would go on to break the heart of Eric Clapton, seduce the man she was really gunning for, Mick Jagger, and climb her way all the way to the top of the nation in which she lived. This is the story of that love triangle and what happened afterwards. On the 23rd of December 1967, a young girl named Carla was born into a profoundly musical family in Turin, Italy. At a concert, her mother had started an affair with a much younger 19-year-old classical guitarist, an affair that would go on for 6 years. And Carla was apparently born of this musical affair. And though she would not find out the truth of her parentage until she was 28 years old, Carla would nonetheless grow as a teenager to have the same admiration for musicians on a stage as her mum did. And for her, there was apparently one in particular. Mick Jagger. A childhood friend of Carla's remembers the absolute passion that Carla, at the age of 16, had for the famous Rolling Stones singer, a true groupie who religiously cut out all the photos of the star, covering the walls of the family apartment. Like all the groupies her age, she fell in love with her idol. The difference was that she didn't give up. One day, I'm going to go out with Mick Jagger, she blurted out at 18 to her boyfriend. And she was 18 when she moved to Paris in 1986 to study art and architecture. At this time, Mark Knopfler, the frontman of Dire Straits, was on tour with Eric Clapton, playing second guitar for him on his August tour. On the 18th of January 1987, that band played the Zenith in Paris, and in the audience was a 19-year-old Carla. The opportunity to break into the very exclusive world of Anglo-Saxon rock stars presented itself during the Paris concert at the Zenith. Like a true groupie, she shoved her way through the pit to reach the stage and found herself in the front row. The musicians noticed the beautiful brunette whose blue eyes fixed on them with such intensity. At the end of the concert, a member of the technical crew came to tell her that Dire Straits had invited her to join them backstage. Dire Straits had invited her? This wasn't a Dire Straits concert, this was an Eric Clapton concert. But Mark Knopfler was in the band, and at the end of the concerts he would perform Money for Nothing, backed by Eric and his band. So I wonder if it was then, during that song, that the young model caught the eye of Mark Knopfler, who, knowing precisely how the groupie game works, invited her backstage. And over the course of the next 2 years, she would make her way to New York. According to her biography, she broke into the world of British rock stars, so much so that in New York she was given an introduction to Eric Clapton himself. Clapton says, "During the Journeyman recording sessions, I was introduced to a pretty young Italian model named Carla. Initially, I wasn't overtly interested, but she was clearly a music fan and seemed quite taken with me. I was very flattered because she was only 21 and very sexy, with long hair, a remarkable figure, and a young-looking face that was slightly Asian, with high cheekbones and almond-shaped eyes. We began dating, and in a very short time, I became obsessed with her." Now, do you remember, according to that biography, Carla said when she was 18 years old, "One day I'm going to go out with Mick Jagger." Well, it turned out the Rolling Stones were coming through New York on their Steel Wheels tour, and Eric Clapton, as a friend of the band, had been invited to join them on stage. This, it turned out, would be Carla's opportunity to attempt to fulfill her mission. The Stones came through town on their Steel Wheels tour, and Carla mentioned that she was a fan of theirs and asked me if I would take her to see them. We went to the show, and afterwards I took her backstage to meet the guys.
Yeah. Rolling Stones in New York.
Yeah.
Did you play with them?
Yeah.
You just crawled on stage and
Well, they knew I was going. The management told them that I was going to come to Shea Stadium, and they said, "Well, let's think of what song we'd like you to play on." And that, to me, is a great honour. You know, they actually, before I was even there, they wanted to know what I was going to play on. And
it just happened. You just got on stage and you jammed together.
Yeah. Well, I've known them. We've been friends since we were 16 years old. You know?
Yeah, it's a tight bunch.
It's a long time.
I remember saying to Jagger, "Please, Mick, not this one. I think I'm in love." In the past, he had made several unsuccessful passes at Patty, that's Eric's former wife, and I knew Carla would appeal to his eye. For all my pleadings, it was only a matter of days before they started a clandestine affair. An heir to the Pirelli tyre fortune, Bruni had all the qualities Mick Jagger looked for in a woman: jaw-dropping beauty, youth, money of her own, $4 million a year in modelling fees plus her inheritance, and, most importantly, a rock star boyfriend. Unlike Eric Clapton, however, Mick was already taken. He was in a married relationship with Jerry Hall, with whom he also already had 2 children. And so, as you might expect, in this period where she was now building up her relationship with Mick Jagger, Carla began winding down her relationship with Clapton. And it was during this period that Eric began to actually meet some of her former boyfriends and discover that what he was now experiencing, they had experienced too. Eric says, "I visited Carla's family home in Saint-Tropez, where I got a fairly chilly reception from Carla, but also got the chance to meet a couple of her previous boyfriends. They seemed like great guys and commiserated with me on my plight, implying that Carla tended to move through men quite quickly and sometimes quite ruthlessly. A short while later, after Carla had stood me up a couple of times, I got a call from the girl who had introduced us, telling me that Carla was definitely seeing Mick, and it was serious. I had heard rumours, and now apparently it was true." And it kind of is an interesting little feature of Carla Bruni's life story that quite often she still has former boyfriends and exes around in the picture somewhere. There's not often a complete clean break. Eric Clapton was heartbroken, but Carla, apparently, was jubilant. She told her friends about the new relationship, ecstatic that her prediction had now come true. Initially, Clapton mostly felt aggrieved at Mick, who was supposed to be his friend, but over time his perspective did mellow because he says that Carla apparently, well and truly, put Mick Jagger through the mill. Here's how Clapton puts it. "To her credit, once the seduction was complete, she didn't continue to lead me on, and at no time did she ever really express any deep feelings for me. But in my madness, I was able to convince myself that this was the love of my life. The deception involved in her affair with Jagger drove a deep wedge between me and him, and for a while I found it hard to think of him without malice. Later on, of course, I quietly felt both gratitude and compassion toward him, first for delivering me from certain doom, and second for apparently suffering such prolonged agony in her service." What was the certain doom? What was the prolonged agony that Mick suffered in Carla's service? Eric probably knows a lot of things that we don't. We don't get any explicit explanation. We do, however, from various sources, get kind of glimpses. "She talked about Mick non-stop," says designer Chantal Thomas. "He often sent a car to wait for her after fashion shows. Carla would tell us, 'Let him wait, I'm not finished.' She wasn't in a hurry, she was making him wait, repeating, 'I'm young and beautiful, so he can be patient.' Hello, it's Mick, may I speak to Carla?" How many times did stylists, dressers and showroom assistants hear this phrase on the phone? One day he called at least 8 times during a single session. It was crazy. I always answered, "She's not finished yet," and he'd call back half an hour later. I went to see Carla, begging her to call him back so we could get this over with once and for all. But she replied, "No, not yet. We haven't finished working." So there you get kind of shadows of this idea that Carla would kind of play with Mick's feelings on purpose. However, I wonder if the main thing Clapton was talking about when he described Mick Jagger's prolonged agony in Carla's service was actually the breakup of his family. Jerry Hall, Mick Jagger's wife and mother to 2 of his children, had been aware of the rumours during the Urban Jungle tour and dismissed Carla as just another camp follower. But when stories surfaced in the press indicating that the affair was still going strong after a full year, Hall ordered him to end it. Instead, Mick flew out the door in a rage. Jerry Hall and Carla Bruni were now locked in a kind of tussle for Mick's affections. In the end, Jerry kind of gave him permission to play around behind her back as long as she remained his number one. However, according to Mick Jagger's biography, Carla Bruni was not willing to be anything other than number one either. Bruni, confronted with the distinct possibility that Hall might ultimately prevail, began to hedge her bets. Having just ended a separate affair with Crown Prince Dmitry of Yugoslavia, she was now also spending time with brash New York real estate tycoon Donald Trump. Although Trump would later concede that Bruni was desperately stuck on Jagger, Carla reportedly offered to end her affair with Mick if Trump dumped his fiancée, Marla Maples. Carla's constant calling became a total pain in the ass, Trump said. She was trying to get me to leave Marla. Something I had in mind anyway, and she was using every psychological trick in the book. In the end, Carla became a woman who is very difficult to even like. Ms. Bruni dominated headlines in 1991 after a photo of Mr. Trump and Marla Maples was splashed on the front page of the New York Post alongside the headline, "It's over." The story itself alleged Mr. Trump was leaving Maples, his then girlfriend, for Miss Bruni, and speculation was further heightened after Mr. Trump was said to have confirmed the rumour to the press himself a day later. But the rumoured affair with Donald Trump never came to anything, and Carla and Mick continued to see each other. The year after all the Donald Trump rumours, 1992, Jerry Hall gave birth to her and Mick's third child, and the very next day after the birth, Mick abandoned her to go on holiday with Carla. The next morning, Mick was on a plane bound for Thailand. Jerry managed to get through to Mick. "Who are you with?" she demanded to know. "Are you with Carla?" He denied it, but that hardly explained why Mick was not by Hall's side. "A man is supposed to be with his woman," Hall said, "when she has just had a baby." Mick thought otherwise. Satisfied that Hall was no longer a problem, Bruni bragged to her friends that 48-year-old Mick was incredible in bed. He is a wonderful lover for an old man. To the press, she lied with alacrity, protesting, "I hardly know the man. It's completely impossible. I can't understand it. Perhaps someone's pretending to be me." But inevitably, eventually things between Carla Bruni and Jerry Hall came to a head. Jerry Hall was devastated. Enraged, she called her rival for an explanation. A friend remembers that the young Carla kept her composure, denied everything, gently moved the receiver away from her ear, and then hung up. Carla had won. She had unleashed the tidal wave, which would result, sometime after their breakup, in Mick Jagger's divorce. And, thanks to him, by 1997, she was now world famous. By the time a reporter for London's Daily Mail cornered her, Hall was ready to throw in the towel. "Yes, it's true," she admitted. "We are separated and I suppose we'll get a divorce. I'm in too much pain for this to go on any longer. I'm hoping for a quiet life. There's nothing more humiliating," she said, "than loving Mick so much you can forgive his infidelities." Despite having played a huge part in the ending of his marriage, Carla would nonetheless not go on to become Mick Jagger's wife, and she would go on to say, "My time with Mick was secret for 8 years. We went to all the world's capitals and we were never photographed once." Carla, who also had a music career herself for a while, apparently even wrote a song about their secret travels together, called At Keith and Anita's Place.
C'était l'été 70, j'étais à peine née ma foi, et pourtant je vivais chez Keith et Anita. Je suis chez Keith et Anita.
It was fun and emotional, she once told the Italian magazine XL. "I learned from all of them, or rather absorbed things. If I had not learnt anything from them, I would have been no better than a groupie." When things finally came to an end between Mick and Carla, it seems Mick was pretty cut up about it, as was the wife of the next man that she seduced. While living with the French publisher Jean-Paul Enthoven, Carla fell in love with his son, the philosopher Raphael Enthoven, who was 10 years her junior. They married after he divorced his wife, who took revenge in 2004 by writing a successful novel loosely based on the stealing of her husband, called Nothing Important. Carla Bruni did not appear to care. Carla started her relationship with Raphael in 2001, and that same year Mick released a song apparently written about her, called Don't Call Me Up. In that song, Mick says, "I was trying to forget you, but you won't tell me how. Lately I'm finding it tricky with your picture plastered all over town. Friends pick you up in conversation just to see how I'll react. I get these internal lacerations that jack me up and lay me out flat. You just wandered off the stage and left me dealing with the pain." And so there we see Mick's state of mind at the end of what Eric Clapton would term his prolonged agony in her service. But Carla's story still wasn't quite over, because 6 years later on, she would make her final step up the social ladder. In November 2007, not long after Carla broke up with Raphael, and only 1 month after Nicolas Sarkozy's second marriage ended in divorce, Bruni was introduced to the French president. After years spent alternating between blanket denials and fervent declarations of love for Jagger, Carla now publicly referred to their relationship as nothing more than a fling. And later on in an interview, she would even deny the relationship had ever existed.
Carla Bruni. You dated both Mick Jagger and Eric Clapton.
I only actually dated Eric.
Wow, I thought you dated Jagger.
We're good friends.
Good friends.
She would also deny ever having had any kind of relationship with Donald Trump. And so Carla Bruni reached the most powerful relationship pairing possible, becoming the partner and then wife of the president of the nation in which she lived. Apparently, while the two of them were house hunting together in Paris, they found a beautiful apartment that they liked. But then Nicolas Sarkozy pulled out of the deal because their downstairs neighbour would have been, you guessed it, Mick Jagger. Just as Eric Clapton was able to go to Saint-Tropez and meet some of her former boyfriends, they were still around. So, somehow, the broken-hearted Mick was also still around. Carla remained married to Sarkozy, but of course she remained friends of a sort with Mick Jagger. His request in song that she would just stay out of his life from then on was clearly disregarded. The beautiful Italian likes to speculate regarding her inability to cut ties with former members of her life. She has a ready-made phrase: "I'm never completely gone from them, just as I'm never completely with them. I don't bind them tightly to me, but the bonds I do make, I keep." And the story of Eric Clapton, Mick Jagger and Carla Bruni, it is kind of a polarising one. What you take away from it very much depends on what you believe. Were all these relationships genuine, organic love, or were they something else? Were these true two-way romantic connections, or was this, to quote the Irish Independent, an example of a narcissistic sexual huntress and calculating social climber who figures out whom to seduce and then pursues them until she achieves her goals? Were these all, in fact, actually just transactional two-way trades where middle-aged blokes in their 40s were willing to use their power and fame to get a model who was 21, and a model who was 21 was willing to use her youth and beauty to get access to power and fame? Was Carla Bruni, in fact, a kind of genius? A cold calculating sort of natural-born killer who strategized the fastest way to the top and then executed that plan with precision and finesse? Or was she a woman in the world of high society who simply fell in love with men who also moved in those circles? Truth be told, it's not for me to say, or for anyone else. Only the people who were involved in those relationships really, truly know the answer. A massive thank you to all my supporters on Patreon, and if you would be interested in signing up and getting access to exclusive bonus content as well as being thanked at the end of videos, the link is in the description. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and as always, I'll see you next time.